It's been quite a lot of time since I've done one of these general roundup videos, which means we have a ton of different games to go through, some of which I have had an absolute blast playing and have become some of my favourite games on the Switch, and others have just disappointed me greatly. So today we're going to talk about some of the best and some of the worst games I've been playing in the last couple of months. But as always, before we get into it, be sure to subscribe to the channel for all things new and cozy on the Nintendo Switch. And let's start with one of my favourites, and that is The Outer Wilds. Now, I will start off by saying this is by no means the perfect Switch port. There are most definitely some frame rate issues here and there, especially when you're flying around in space. And there's also some weird things that happen with the textures as you go around different places as well. But nonetheless, this has been such a uniquely fantastic experience. And if you have played Outer Wilds before, you'll know that I'm about to be incredibly careful with my wording. For this is a first-person, story-driven experience that sees you, a brand new astronaut, set out to space in search of answers. The only problem is, you find yourself stuck in a time loop. And I think for me, the best way I could describe this whole game is it's basically got the same vibes as something like Interstellar. Now, the game itself is actually basically open world. You can set off in your little spaceship and go to any planet inside of this solar system. And this means that there's going to be an awful lot of mindless exploration where you're not always sure what you're doing or what is happening. But much like Interstellar, it kind of all comes together at the end in a really big, aha moment. And if you were to ask me if there's a game that you could go out there and replay for the very first time again, I honestly think Outer Wilds would be up there, as the way all these puzzle pieces as you're flying around and landing on each of the different planets, different moons, even an asteroid, the second that things start to make sense and they all fall into pieces is such a fantastic moment in gaming. And I honestly can't think of any other games that let you experience a story in the way Outer Wilds does. Because it's so open world and you can go anywhere that you want to, you piece together the puzzle pieces yourself and you can find them in any order whatsoever. It's also a game which I found really, really rewarding, as when I first set out, I absolutely sucked at flying my spacecraft, to the point where I was getting almost frustrated and nearly gave up in the first hour, and then you cut to me like 10 hours in, and I am a flying expert, I can land on literally anything, and you also get to learn things throughout the time loop as well. Like, one of the biggest things is how things change over time. Again, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's honestly such a rewarding experience to know when certain things are going to happen in certain places, plan your day around it. And I love the fact that every time you discover a brand new piece of information, it gets recorded on the computer so you can go back and check out everything you know about a certain subject so far. That being said, this is most definitely not a perfect game. The whole idea of having a time loop also comes with some negative side effects. Like, for example, you mess up in the furthest reaches of the universe, and then you have to go and retravel there the next time loop in order to restart or get back to where you were before, which can be a little bit frustrating, especially if you do what I did and fall and die a lot. Then it can get a bit annoying. And it's also one of those games where you just have to accept that there will be long periods of time where you've just got to enjoy not knowing what on earth is happening or what you're doing. So as I said, if you enjoy the likes of films like Interstellar or 2001 Space Odyssey, where you've kind of got to just embrace the cluelessness, then I think you're going to really enjoy this. I will say though, the story is pretty well done in the way that it keeps you invested enough, even if you haven't found out that much, to always want to do just one more day and figure out just one more piece of information. As I said, this just to me was such a special game. I'm so glad it came to the Switch because it gave me an excuse to play it. That being said, if you have any other way of playing it, like a Steam Deck or an Xbox or anything like that, the game is much prettier to be played that way. But nonetheless, if you can ignore the frame rate issues on the Switch, I think this is an experience like nothing else. So that's one of the favourite games I've played in the last 3 months. Let's get on to possibly one of my biggest disappointments, and that's Princess Peach Showtime. Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't think Princess Peach is necessarily a bad game. I just think that it didn't get the same treatment as all the other AAA Nintendo titles, especially for this price point. Because on paper, Princess Peach is a game that I would absolutely eat up. as not only does it see you play as Peach, it also sees you enter all these different plays where you get to play as different versions of Peach and take on different challenges, different puzzles, different actions, depending on what Peach's role was. And I will say, that part of the game I thoroughly enjoyed. You got to be Mermaid Peach and swim under the water and control fish. You also got to be Ice Skating Peach, where you got to take on different dances with these different characters as well. There's also a bunch of different versions of Combat Peach. You got to be Sword Fighter Peach, who gets to do sword fighting, Cowgirl Peach, who does combat using a lasso, Ninja Peach that has nunchucks, and also Kung Fu Peach as well. And then you have my favorite type of Peach, which was Patisserie Peach, which had mini games to do with baking cakes and cookies and stuff like that. And overall, I really enjoyed the different mini games and everything that came with these different plays involving Peach. I just have two major issues with the game, and the first one is how long it is, considering its price, as the main story will take you only around 8 to 9 hours to complete, which, considering it's on sale for the eShop at full AAA Nintendo prices, that is not a very long game time. And this might not be a big deal to everyone, but it's important to know before you go into the game what exactly you're getting for that sort of price. So this is 5 or so hours shorter than the likes of Mario Odyssey, but unlike Mario Odyssey, 100% completing Princess Peach is nowhere near as hard, so you still won't get that much content even if you're a completionist. My other issue with Princess Peach is it's missing the polish that the likes of Mario Odyssey has, and it makes me so sad to see. If you compare Princess Peach side by side with Mario Odyssey, I think it's easy to say it simply just doesn't look as good. The graphics quality just isn't there for Princess Peach, which it needs to be for the price tag and the game length. Then you have the loading screens, which take forever between plays, and even the music can't keep going as it's loading. The frame rate itself doesn't hold particularly well in some areas, and you just have the general polish and the general textures just looking a little bit off. And it's disappointing to see not the same care and effort go into this sort of title as Nintendo's other ones. Overall, I think the game is great. It's a really enjoyable experience. It's really unique, and honestly, I didn't find the difficulty level was too easy for me not to have a great time playing it. But I just don't think it's worth the full price tag. So this is by no means saying don't pick it up, just wait for a really good sale before you do it. And most definitely don't waste your £50 voucher on this one. Back to games that I've been enjoying, and this one is just so underrated. I've spoken about it a few times already because I'm honestly amazed at how few people have been talking about it, and that is Bandle Tale. But before we get into that, I just want to thank today's sponsor, Garden Joy, who this Earth Day I've partnered up with to help them on their quest to plant 1 million trees. And the best part is, to join in, all you need to do is download the game. Which, if you haven't heard of Garden Joy before, it's a mobile landscaping game that allows you to design stunning settings in locations from all around the world with true-to-life plants and decorations. And not only can you then go and share these designs with the community, you also get to learn all about the plants, their seasons, the climates, and even learn about landscaping techniques as well. Oh, and did I mention this is also a competition between all the cozy gaming content creators as well? So all you need to do to join in is download the game from my link in the description down below, complete the 3 tutorial quests, and then you'll get to choose which location you want this real-life tree to be planted. So make sure to click the link to either help me win or to do a little bit to help the planet. Thank you again to Garden Joy for sponsoring this video. And let's get back to why Bandle Tale is such a fantastic game. Although I will say, whilst I absolutely loved it, I do recognise this might not be the game for everyone. But to me, this ticked so many of the boxes that have been missing in cozy games for a very long time. This is described as being a crafting RPG, which means there's no battles or combat in the game whatsoever, which is the first reason why I found it to be a refreshing experience. But much like RPGs, there is still an XP and level grind, but instead of this being done by fighting, you actually do it by crafting instead. But the reason this has felt so different from so many cozy games that have come out recently is that it's chock full of character. You see, one of the biggest focuses on Bandle Tale is actually the story and the characters themselves. And this is what made it so hard for me to put down. This will see you play as a furry little yordle, which is a creature with a love of all things knitting. But after you attend a party that goes drastically wrong, you've kind of thrown the land into chaos. And it's now up to you to try and fix all of the portals that are used for transportation. Now, to me, this has a similar initial experience to the likes of Stardew Valley. The game kind of tells you the bare bones of what you need to know, but then most definitely just throws you into the deep end, which means you'll find yourself looking things up on a wiki pretty frequently, which I know is not everyone's sort of vibe. And I think to me, the really refreshing part of all of this is despite the fact that it's actually a pretty long game, I think it's 40 to 50 hours of content, it somehow doesn't really feel that repetitive. You see, as you progress in Bandle Tale, you'll find yourself progressing in several different skill trees. And honestly, this is where a lot of people feel overwhelmed initially, because it is a lot. And by now you might have figured out that this is actually made by the same people who made Graveyard Keeper, because they have very similar vibes. But the nice thing about having so many skill trees is the fact that you constantly gain new skills, and this keeps the game feeling different and refreshing as you can do more things as you go. I also really love that a big part of this game is just throwing banging parties. And although this mechanic itself isn't explained well, and I had to go and look up a wiki for it to really get to grips with it, it is a really fun aspect of the game. And it's really not often that I found a cozy game that makes me actually laugh out loud with the dialogue, but Bandle Tale has managed it. If you're someone who's kind of getting sick and tired of the same old mechanics in cozy games, this brings something new, refreshing and different, and so long as you're willing to go look up a wiki or a tutorial on how to do things, I genuinely think this is such a fantastic experience. Back to another game that has just kind of let me down, and this is the Switch port for Lake. Again, this was a game I was so excited for. I have seen so many people talk amazing things about how good it is on other platforms, but literally the second I loaded up the game, I was nothing but disappointed. The thing that really caught my eye about Lake is this kind of mishmash between different game styles, as it sees you play as Meredith, who takes a break from a career in the city to start delivering mail in her hometown. And this is a mesh between a life sim that sees you do your job as a delivery woman, but also choosing what you do after work as well, be it hanging out with friends, helping your neighbors, or staying home. But it couples all of this by also being a narrative experience that lets you tell your very own story. But as I've been talking about what the game is, I think it's pretty clear what my main issues with the Switch port is. It just looks and runs terribly. So not to say the game itself is a bad game, I actually adore Lake, just not when it's on the Nintendo Switch. Because this, in its current state at least, is just not it. I do hope they do some patches and fix it, much like the likes of My Time at Sandrock have done, which, I mean, look at the difference in the gameplay now versus where it was then. So there's still a chance this game could become good. Just right now, it's not it. Next, let's talk about a game which came out just a few days ago, and that is Sticky Business. I have had so much fun for what is basically just an £8 game. And although there isn't a whole lot to it, I still feel like it's well worth the money. The game is simply just a sticker running business sim, and it will see you design stickers with all the preset assets that they have, arrange them on sheets of paper to print out, and then you'll also be packing up different orders as well. At the very beginning of the game, it also gets you to pick whether you want to have time being a mechanic in it, or you can just ignore time altogether. And as you progress through the game, you'll be able to unlock different motives to make stickers, also unlocking different things you can put in the packaging, or even different papers to print on as well. And if this isn't enough, there's even a story you can kind of follow along with if you want to, or ways you can figure out what types of stickers will sell better than others. Now, playing with a controller is definitely more tricky than playing in handheld, because in handheld mode, you'll be able to use the touchscreen as well, which makes things so much easier. But once you get the hang of it, controller isn't too bad either. I think for me, the thing I enjoyed the most was just designing my stickers. Some of them are cool, some of them are cursed, but people seem to buy them anyway. And I can honestly see myself playing so much of this game while being sat downstairs, watching TV, watching a movie. It truly is a really chill experience. It runs phenomenally well on the Switch. And I was so happy to see this get shadow dropped at the Indie Direct. So if you're someone looking for a lot of hours of fun for under £10, I could definitely recommend it. On to another disappointment, and this has to be Garden Life. And again, this isn't a bad game, I am just not a fan of the way it looks on the Nintendo Switch. Garden life in theory is a really cool concept that sees you basically rock up to an abandoned allotment and you get to start taking care of it. And this is the epitome of just a peaceful and cozy experience, where you can choose what type of game you want this to be, as you can either play in a story mode, which sees you take charge of an abandoned community center. As you progress through the story, you'll earn rewards, which will unlock things like new tools, seeds, ornaments, or areas of the garden to take care of. Or you can just play in creative mode, where everything is unlocked from the beginning. This is basically just a garden sim, as it sees you do absolutely everything you'd need to do to take care of plants in real life as well, as you'll need to water them, fertilize them, clip them, pull out weeds and protect them from pests, and even try your best to unlock different colours of plants as well. I also love the fact that you weren't just locked to this garden, and you could also pop into the town to go buy different things as well, and was thoroughly surprised that the town was such a cool part of the game. But when I put the game side by side with what it looks from PC to what it looks like on the Switch, you can see just how much you're missing. Also, one thing to bear in mind when you're seeing this gameplay is that the price of this game is around £35. So yeah, it was pretty steep, even if the graphics were not looking like this. The next few games we're going to go through are part of what I like to call the maybe pile. These are games I've really enjoyed playing, but didn't quite do enough to make it to the must-buy category. And that's because although I love them, I'm not sure they're games for everyone, but we're going to go through it. First up is the Another Code collection. Now this is a very old-fashioned and typical mystery game. And I'm going to be real, after my first hour of playing Another Code, I was not impressed. In fact, I put it down for about a week and kind of forgot about it and kind of made myself go and pick it back up. But once I got a couple of hours into it and it started to pick up its pace, I actually found that the story was really solid and really interesting. In this, you play as Ashley, who, after believing that her father was dead, receives a letter from him telling her to come to this island. But the mysteries don't end there. As soon, not only do you have to piece together what's going on in your life, you also come across this ghost boy who has a mystery all of his own that you also need to uncover. Now at first, the gameplay is definitely incredibly slow, and mostly sees you just running around from point A to point B with no real difficult puzzles to get to grips with. But that does most definitely change once you get into the heart of the game, that sees you come up against sometimes some pretty tricky puzzles, and despite there being a hint system in the game, I did find myself googling a few things in order to figure it out. And I wouldn't say the puzzles feel like they were made for kids. Some of them were actually pretty tricky. That being said, one of the big issues with Another Code is it doesn't really tell you what you've been up to. So say you've left the game for 3 days and you've come back to sit back down and play it. If you're someone like me who can't even remember what they had for breakfast that morning, you might find yourself a little bit lost. But you can toggle on this mode that kind of tells you where you need to run to in order for the next part of the story or for the game to progress. And that became really handy because once I made it to the next story point, I could kind of re-jog my memory and go, ah yeah, this is what I was doing. The reason why I say this game might not be worth the money for everyone is that it does most definitely feel a little bit dated. Not in terms of its graphics, I say graphically and with the voice acting, it looks pretty good, but it does have some really awkward moments. Like one of them, and this is my pet peeve in any type of game, is when you're in a cutscene and it takes you out of the cutscene and it makes you press one button or move like 2 meters in the game before it starts a whole nother round of cutscenes. Like that, for example, just felt like a very older type of game than I'm used to for this sort of genre. It also falls into the trap of feeling overly hand-holdy at some points. Like sometimes it would give you a hint without you actually wanting the hint. Like for example, sometimes I'll be doing a puzzle and go, oh wait, I know I need to go look at X or Y in order to figure out the rest of this puzzle. And then you'd exit and it basically like tell you the answer. So it wouldn't really sometimes give you the chance to figure out what's going on and would kind of feed you the next part of information whether you wanted it or not, which was a bit sad when I did want to try and figure out these puzzles myself as much as I could. Some of the puzzles also felt a little bit clanky. I think some of that comes from the fact that this game was previously made to be played on, I think, the Wii, and sometimes would have used some of the Wii mechanics that they decided to get rid of in this version, which kind of took out the interactivity for some of the puzzles, and I think it was a bit obvious when some of the puzzles would have had that mechanic. And also just the overall menu system was a bit clunky and a bit awkward sometimes for some of the puzzles. So overall, I think it was a really fun experience. The story is surprisingly strong and I wasn't expecting it to be, but just know this is a more old-fashioned approach to this sort of game, and it depends whether or not you think you can deal with that as to whether you think it'd be fun. The other game which I really enjoyed but I know isn't for everyone is Botonny Manor, and the reason why I say this is I had a fantastic time playing it. I think it's a really unique puzzle game, but it is a bit steep price-wise for the number of hours you get. Overall, you're looking at 5 or so hours in order to finish Botonny Manor, which again is fine if you know what you're getting into, but might be a little bit steep for some people. That being said though, Botonny Manor is such a refreshingly unique take on a puzzle game. This will see you going around finding clues in a 19th century English manor, where you're trying to figure out what conditions each of the seeds you have needs in order to flourish. Now, the clues come in so many different forms. They can be leftover letters that you read through, postcards, pictures that are put up, or even just leftover objects and items on the shelves around you. But the thing to me that made Botonny Manor stand out among other cozy games is once again the substance that's behind it. Because Botonny Manor doesn't just purely feed you different puzzles that you need to figure out. As you're exploring, you get to learn a little bit more about Arabella, the botanist who you're playing as. Because the 19th century wasn't too kind on female scientists. And this is a story that will take you through all of her struggles in order to be recognised and appreciated and accepted into the community. And as a woman in STEM myself, I really like the way in which they did this story. Now, I overall really enjoyed the puzzles, and I actually think this game looks absolutely breathtaking on the Switch. I honestly wasn't expecting it to look this good. I think the only downside is sometimes they give you quite a lot of clues and no real way to keep track of them. So I found myself having to backtrack and write things down on my phone in order to try and figure out some of these puzzles. And actually, don't let the look of this game deceive you, because some of the puzzles were really difficult. Again, a really enjoyable experience. It's just up to you whether this is worth £20+. Next up, we have Planet of Lana. And a word of warning, don't be fooled by the aesthetic of this game, because although it looks very cozy, there are some parts which most definitely are not. As this is a cinematic puzzle adventure that gives me the same sort of vibes as War of the Worlds. As this once peaceful world that had a balance between humans, natures and animals has turned into something completely different. But despite the presence of an army, this isn't a story about war. And instead, this is a journey where you just simply try and find your friend. And this truly has a little bit of everything. The game gives you a story and a purpose. There's these platforming-like sections that you need to do. There's also puzzle solving that gets really interesting, as not only can you control the main character, but you can also control this little cat-like creature as well, meaning that the puzzles can get pretty intricate at times. There's also some absolutely stunning areas to discover, but then you also have some very stealth-orientated parts that can at times be pretty unforgiving to you. I think where most people are going to have issues though is probably the storytelling part, as this game doesn't use words whatsoever, and I think if you're not looking out for it or not really paying attention, you might actually miss some of the big story aspects. This is a game I thoroughly enjoyed. There's just a few reasons why I'm hesitant to say everyone should buy it. I think some people going in will think this is a really cozy experience, and it's actually not so much of that. And it also only clocks in at being just over 4 hours long. So again, it's up to you to decide whether that sort of game length is worth the price tag. That's my roundup of games I've been playing recently and whether I think they're worth it or not. Let me know in the comments down below some of your favorites that you've been playing in 2024. And if you want to see some of the best free games on the Nintendo Switch, click this video here.